This is the old city of Stockholm. There's the ship right there. As you see it, this is the bridge going over to the island. And this is Gamlan in old city of Stockholm. As you hear all those ducks in the water. Just thousands of ducks everywhere. Mallard ducks, beautiful ducks. And swan too, geese, swan, whatever you call them. Beautiful city. This is the bridge that leads to the island. Ancient city. And there's the ship where my hotel is. This is Brian 2, February 16, 2021, Stockholm, Sweden. Organized stalking, gaslighting continue. Sometimes severe at regular intervals to keep the victim sensitized to the fact it is happening. It has to be severe and aggressive at regular intervals to sensitize the victim. If the victim is unaware he's being stalked, then organized stalking is ineffective. Organized stalking is basically government informants turned into provocateurs. Government informants and government perpetrators, because many of them are government employees, law enforcement, etc. So they're also government perpetrators, but the majority of them are just low-level government informants. And so organized stalking, they use what's called the floating box. The floating box keeps the victim boxed in everywhere the victim goes, no matter whether he's in a car or walking down the street. And it's based on the choice reference patterns. The choice references are memories. So choice reference patterns are simply a pattern of the previous memories of the victim. So they're able to allocate resources, time, money, manpower to the favorite hot spots of the victim. Mind control victim. Those are previous memories. Remember, mind control is based on interfering with the victim's memory and thought process. And then once you understand it's based on choice reference patterns, memories of the victim, you must then understand what it's comprised of. And organized stalking is comprised of two things. It's situational scenarios and conversational scenarios. Street theater. That's street theater. Situational and conversational scenarios based on events or topics that will always capture the attention of the victim. If they cannot capture the victim's attention, then organized stalking is ineffective. This is Brian 2. There's the ship that I'm in. And then this is just the one of the many bays, inlets of Stockholm. Stockholm is just surrounded by water on every side. It's like a massive, I don't know what you call it, but it's just islands, just a collection of islands off the Swedish coast, but they're not really islands. They're just like peninsulas that jut out everywhere. And so that's the bridge right there leading over to the island where the hotel is. They blew my budget. I tried to get out to Ecuador, and there was interference and there was chaos and there was more stalking and gaslighting, and they blew my budget. And then I was trying to document that it's happening. Organized stalking and gaslighting. Gaslighting is designed to make the victim think that he's crazy, and if the victim is aware that he's targeted, then to make others think the victim is crazy. So gaslighting is basically engaging in situational or conversational scenarios, so fanciful and fantastic in nature that cannot be believed. So they simply put, when the victim tries to complain and document these fanciful, these trivial, paltry, fanciful and fantastic tactics are happening, then the victim's complaints appear and sound by default trivial, paltry, fanciful, and fantastic in nature. So the victim is discredited, while at the same time they're able to achieve their objectives of constantly provoking the victim with these scripted mind games, organized stalking, okay, gaslighting. they're able to achieve their objectives of provoking the victim constantly into emotional responses, synaptic responses, which can be remotely measured and integrated back into R&M data. So organized stalking is based on those just various models of deception and manipulation. Occam razor principle basically is one of those models of deception and manipulation they constantly use, and basically provides the simplest answer is always the truth. The Occam razor principle basically provides the simplest explanation is always the best explanation. So in order to discredit anyone, all one need do, or a group of people for that matter, all one need do is engage in a sufficiently complex scheme or game of harassment, and because the more complicated the truth, the less the likelihood of belief by the ordinary person, the complexity of that harassment will generally be enough to cause most people to turn away in disbelief. It's called the Occam razor principle, and there are other models of deception and manipulation which they use, and that's just one of many. Hyper game theory, for example. Hyper game theory is another mathematical model of deception and manipulation that they utilize. It's a mathematical model which they have incorporated into their protocols of CIA and DIA mind control technologies. So basically, with hyper game theory, the game never ends because there's always a higher optimum to choose from. There's always a next move to be made. So they force the victim into a never-ending series of continuous responses, just trying to function and survive each day, as each response is an evoked potential, a synaptic response, which can be remotely measured and integrated back into R&M data. So that's the game. That's how it works. They're engaging in whole brain emulation. They're breaking the brain of the victim down to the synaptic level. And they use organized stalking, gaslighting, and these other models of deception and manipulation to achieve that. Basically, without organized stalking, which is commonly referred to as gang stalking or cause stalking, and there are other names for it, but really it's just organized stalking, okay? There is no way in a real world environment for them to verify the responses are consistent. The emotional responses that they're seeing on their virtual augmented interface, there's no way for them to verify those responses are consistent without organized stalking and these scripted mind games based on gaslighting and other models of deception and manipulation. So people want to know, who controls the organized stalkers. They say, it's the police. Well, it's law enforcement. I've heard all kinds of stories. Well, it is the police and it is law enforcement and it isn't. Okay? Very important you understand that it is and it is not. Organized stalking is controlled by what are called community-based agents. And these community-based agents are almost always former law enforcement, retired military, etc. People who have some degree of expertise in the area of surveillance and counter surveillance, etc., etc. Okay, so they're almost always going to be, and this is one of their kings of Sweden, I do believe, although I don't know who it is. They're always going to be, prior military, prior law enforcement. And what these community-based agents do after they retire from law enforcement, be it local, state, or federal, after they retire from the military, etc., they get secondary jobs, such as security consultant or private detective. You'll find a lot of them are private detectives, okay? And what that allows these community-based agents to do is double dip, okay? Double dip. They're able to keep their clearance, their top secret clearance, they're able to keep after they retire and then they double dip in their secondary jobs, secondary occupations, which they're required to have to justify, you know, the presence of the use of so many people. Again, security consultant, private detective, it just goes on and on. There are many different occupations that they use. Kevin Fusich, F-U-C-I-C-H, Kevin Fusich of New Orleans, Louisiana, is a good example of these community-based agents. Former law enforcement, military, now a private detective. And he has, you know, rapid response teams. He has his own security force, rapid response, made up of special forces. He brags about it on his internet site. Kevin Fusich, Force One, I think. Anyway, you can Google him and you'll understand how they're used against you. Researching the history, the organizational history, etc. of Kevin Fusich in New Orleans, Louisiana will give you an understanding of how the organized stalkers, government informants turned into provocateurs are used. So they're controlled at the community level by what are called community-based agents. And these community-based agents keep their clearances after they retire from law enforcement, after they retire from the military. They keep their top secret clearances, okay? And that allows them to double dip. They get their secondary jobs as security consultants, private detectives, and what have you, and then they're also able to be utilized by the government. And they're the ones responsible for the direction. They're carrying out the orders of the hive mind teams, okay? The cognitive researchers, the psychiatrists, psychologists, neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, etc. They're carrying out, you know, their instructions, but they're the ones responsible for keeping the victim inside this floating box of perpetrators and provocateurs. And that's what people need to understand. They're no longer active law enforcement, they're retired law enforcement. Now that's not always the case, okay? With me, they used active duty special ops, Marine special ops against me starting in New Orleans, which makes me believe that this is, you know, naval intelligence operations that these cognitive researchers, remember it's DOD, okay, 4 agencies behind it all, according to Dr. Robert Duncan in his book Project Soulcatcher, who's a former CIA neuroscientist who blew the whistle on these atrocities. 4 agencies are behind it all. You can be traced back to 4 agencies. Those 4 agencies are the Department of Defense, who provides all the funding through their Black Ops budgets. Then it's the National Security Agency. They provide the top scientists, okay? Or I should say the top science, okay? And then it's the CIA and DIA. Those are the 4 agencies behind it all. The Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency. And they're the ones that provide the handlers and the operators, okay? DARPA, for example, would be part of NSA, okay? But DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and Central Intelligence Agency are the ones that provide the handlers and the operators. And these handlers and operators are the cognitive researchers responsible for the torture and assassination of mind control victims, okay? So it's a lot of personnel involved at the local, state, and federal level, obviously, okay? But it can all be traced back to 4 organizations and agencies behind it all. DOD, NSA, CIA, and DIA. And you want to know who's actively involved in it, it's the CIA and the DIA. And they're using contractors. And where are these contractors? Where are these cognitive researchers? They are hiding in plain sight. They're not in some underground base somewhere, okay? They're hiding in plain sight. They are, they are the doctor at the local hospital. They are the, you know, psychologists at the local mental health clinic, a local mental health hospital. They're the psychologist at a local mental health clinic. They're the neuroscientists at the local university. Okay, they're hiding in plain sight. In every community around the world, the intelligence agencies it's a global paradigm. They're all involved in it. All the major intelligence agencies of the world are involved in this technology. the government first in the world to implement and deploy this technology will have an incomparable advantage over every other government on earth. That's why you have an arms race, a Cold War 2.0, if you will, between the Russians and the Chinese and the Americans and the Five Eyes and the Europeans. They're all in on it, okay? That's why when I come to Europe, I'm so heavily stalked and attacked, brutally attacked. I suffered crippling injuries. I have paralytic shoulder injury because of what the Spanish did to me. But I've been attacked in other places. In Ecuador, okay? These third world countries know better than to, you know, take on the American government. You're not that important to them. They're going to do whatever they're told. So again, the Americans use, with me, for example, they use a perpetual, I call it a perpetual. It's been 23 years. 23 years they have used Interpol against me. Now that's just with my knowledge. I don't know exactly how far back it goes. My targeting goes all the way back to childhood. I'm virtually certain of it. Absolutely certain of it, but I can't prove it. But I can prove that in 1997 it was well underway. That one thing I can prove. It, you know, and it was the Americans all along. And it was going on before that, probably in 1996 in Nicaragua. I could probably prove that too if I had the evidence. But it started. These directed energy attacks would land me in the hospital. Okay, they would land me literally. I just would collapse on the ground and couldn't breathe. And doctors thought it was panic attacks. They would rush me to the hospital in the Cayman Islands. They would run all kind of drug tests. They didn't know what it was. Those drug tests would come back empty, would come back negative because I don't do drugs. Okay, they used voice of God weapons on me, making me think God was speaking to me. And of course, I didn't understand biocommunications technology at that time. I didn't know anything about all this. So they had briefly convinced me that, you know, this was really happening, that God was speaking to me. And they've done that with many people. Okay, but you know, that was going on in the Cayman Islands in 1997. And of course, back in America, obviously, continuously, the violence and the attacks and so forth going on for many years in America. And so here we are in Stockholm, in the old city. This is an ice skating rink. A stage, probably pretty active in the probably very active in the summertime and probably pretty active in the wintertime too, but COVID-19 has kind of put a damper on everything. And so that's what they do. They're community-based agents, and they're private detectives. They're mainly private detectives, security consultants, and so forth, who have retired. Okay, the key word there, they are retired. They are former military. They are former law enforcement who have kept their clearance. Okay, and they are now double dipping. Okay, they are security consultants, private detectives. Yes, they're all of that, but they're also double dipping as community-based agents responsible for the direction of organized stalking against victims of this technology, against targeted individuals. So that's what's happening. That's how it works. People think, you know, the police are the police officers that show up to their door are the ones attacking them. No, they're not. You call the police, you know, most likely they're not going to know what's going on, and you complain that you're victimized by this technology, they're going to throw you in a psych ward because they don't understand it. I mean, and it's unfortunate that people are victimized that way. Especially Todd Griffin. Todd Griffin is rotting away in a mental health federal mental health state prison. Mental health prison, federal. He's rotting away because he fell victim to this technology. They're using the technology to repattern or reconstruct the memory and thought process of the victim. So what happens is the supercomputer is able to remotely capture, after it's been, the victim's brainwave signature has been, the victim's brainwave signature, they move next to the victim, okay, with a local neural sensor system. Look, those are key words to understand, okay? A local neural sensor system, okay? When I say local, I mean, you know, within proximity of the victim, okay? And they move next to the victim, and with that local neural sensor system, they're able to remotely measure the brainwave patterns of the victim and determine the victim's brainwave signature. And then once they have the victim's brainwave signature, they copy that digital brainwave imprint, the brainwave signature of the victim, and then they upload it. They upload it back to their supercomputer, and then they remotely tie the victim. Key word, remotely tie for life, the victim for life to that supercomputer by way of a bidirectional stream of electromagnetic low frequency waves, specifically tuned to that brainwave signature. Okay? That's how it works. But once that begins, they've got to map out the victim's brain. They've got to create a cognitive model. And that doesn't happen overnight. That takes that's a lengthy process. They're mapping out, they're reverse engineering the sensor. They're using physical and psychological trauma to map out and reverse engineer the sensory and neural pathways of the victim's brain and central nervous system. Okay, in order to use physical and psychological trauma, not just psychological trauma, physical trauma as well, to map out and reverse engineer the sensory and neural pathways of the victim's brain and central nervous system, they have to engage in physical and psychological violence. Okay, physical and psychological violence. All right, that's gaslighting, that's organized stalking. All right, to provoke the victim into emotional responses, which can be remotely measured and integrated back into R&M data. And so, by constantly provoking and harassing the victim, the supercomputer is downloading all the victim's responses. Once they remotely tie the victim for life to that supercomputer, okay, once that happens, all right, then the supercomputer begins to download all of the responses of the victim, all the synaptic responses, whole brain emulation, breaking the brain of the victim down to the synaptic level. So it begins to remotely monitor and download all the responses, electromagnetic activity, all the electromagnetic energy, all the brainwave patterns, brainwave signals of the victim. Remotely, it begins to download all of that back into its supercomputer using artificial superintelligence software programs, and begins to build this cognitive model of the victim's brain to eventually achieve direct behavioral control over the victim. That's how it works. That's what's going on. It's satanic. It's unbelievable. But it is happening. This is Brian 2 in Stockholm, Sweden. February 16, 2021.